Last season, right around this time actually, almost a year ago to the day, I was on my way to Chicago to go see the Bulls play at the United Center. And when I landed, I took my phone off airplane mode and I got the Shams notification that Zach Lavine and the Chicago Bulls have mutually agreed to find a new home. In other words, trade him. And while we knew a trade likely was going to happen not right away, most had thought by December 15th or even January 15th, when most of the players in the league would become trade eligible, that Zach Lavine would eventually be moved. But as the weeks wore on, it started to become more and more clear that there was very little interest in trading for Zach Lavine and his contract under the league's new CBA rules. And even when some trade rumors started heating up, namely with the Detroit Pistons, Zach would go down and with an untimely injury that would put him out for the rest of the season, and thus Zach would remain with the team without getting moved before the trade deadline. But going into the offseason, it was thought, okay, one, this team is going to be heading in a new direction, they're going to overhaul this roster and embark on this new youth movement, and two, Zach is likely going to be one of the first players to go. So Alex Caruso gets traded, they execute a sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan, they let Andre Drummond walk in free agency, but the market for Zach remained non-existent. And once you know it, that remained the case throughout the offseason going into training camp, when Zach Lavine, now 12 games into the season, is still with this franchise, still with the team, after everything that happened a year ago when we all thought Zach's days in a Bulls uniform were numbered. But that hasn't necessarily been all that bad for the Bulls, because while sure it would have been ideal to trade Zach earlier to give them more flexibility in the offseason on their cap sheet and rip the band-aid off sooner in aborting that experiment from last season, Zach's trade value last year was at an all-time low. He wasn't playing well, he was going through injuries, ultimately had a season-ending injury. If the Bulls had shipped him to another team, either before the deadline or in the offseason, they likely would have had to give up assets in order to trade him. It was in fact reported that teams were wanting the Bulls to include a first-round pick in any deal where they were sending Zach Lavine because of the risk of taking on his max contract, which of course the Bulls were not willing to do. And so far, still early, but so far, it's actually paid off for the Bulls, because Zach is back fully healthy and looking like his old all-star self and being one of the most efficient scorers in the game of basketball. He also now has 1 year less on his contract, only 2 more years after the season. And you would imagine there is going to be a better market for Zach Lavine's services leading up to the trade deadline. Now, that's just purely me speculating. It has not been reported anywhere that teams are lining up to get Zach Lavine or even making calls to the Bulls about Zach. We also don't even know, and it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case, if AK is saying, you know what, we're going to keep Zach and turn away offers. We all know how AK likes to double down on his decisions and prefers continuity over everything, but assuming this trend in Zach's play continues, and even though, sure, there is a world where the Bulls can hang on to him while still prioritizing the development of their young players, we're going to assume that Zach at some point will be traded this season. And based on his play so far this year, we're going to try and determine his trade value and bring out the old trade machine and run through some scenarios that could work in getting a deal done. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. By the way, if you're new to the channel and you like Bulls and you like this content, be sure to subscribe. About 55% of you watching are not subscribed, and I would greatly appreciate it in helping the channel be able to grow. Now, in going through some of the mock trades for Zach Lavine, I actually wanted to start with one that I saw from Bleacher Report that was interesting. But this is one with the Orlando Magic, who are absolutely in need of more offense. Bringing in KCP hasn't really worked out that well for them thus far from a shooting standpoint, and getting Zach, who has been one of the most lethal three-point shooters in the NBA, would be an upgrade for them. In this scenario, the Bulls would trade Zach Lavine and Torrey Craig to the Magic, while the Bulls would get Cole Anthony, Jonathan Isaac, Tristan Da Silva, and a 2025 first-round pick. I mean, when you consider the fact that the Bulls were essentially going to have to treat a Zach Lavine trade as a salary dump, or worse, having to give up assets to move him, to now getting a first-round pick in return, while also getting the Magic's rookie, their first-round pick from this past draft, in Tristan Da Silva, but then also landing a young player in Cole Anthony, who was a member of the 2020 draft class, and Jonathan Isaac, who is one of the more underrated defenders in the league. He just can't stay healthy, but is on a very team-friendly deal. Like, this is a solid return for the Bulls, given what we thought we were going to get for Zach Lavine. That said, I don't think the Magic would do this trade. Zach would be an upgrade for them, and he's a player that would fit their system well and really rounding out their roster, but this would more or less be giving up 2 first-round picks for Zach Lavine when you consider that Da Silva was just recently drafted. Not only that, but the Magic have put themselves in a bit of a bind financially with the max contract they gave Franz Wagner and the near-max deal they gave Jalen Suggs, and also knowing Banchero is going to be eligible for an extension this summer that is going to be another max contract, taking on yet another one when Zach Lavine is going to put them into the near second apron territory, and I just don't see that making sense for them. If you're the Bulls, though, yeah, I would take this offer, especially when Cole Anthony and Jonathan Isaac are on very team-friendly deals that could easily be tradable contracts down the line. But now, let's look at the old trade machine, and of course, I had to include a deal with the Lakers because the Zach Lavine to the Lakers trade rumors will probably never stop until he eventually joins that team. But no, for the Lakers, the reason they would be a possible destination is because they're still trying to contend for a title. They need another scoring option, one that can preferably spread the floor but can score at all three levels. And so in this mock trade, the Bulls are sending out Zach and Torrey Craig while receiving the expiring contract of D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura, and Jared Vanderbilt, while also obtaining 2 second-round picks. Initially, I put a first-round pick in there, but I'm still unsure if teams are actually going to be willing to send a first-round pick in a deal for Zach Lavine, especially for a team like the Lakers that doesn't have a lot of their picks to work with. I'm not a D'Angelo Russell fan, but it's an expiring contract, and you don't have to re-sign him in the summer, so you get that money off your books going into the summer of 2025. Hachimura, I mean, he's been underwhelming, but still young enough and productive enough for the Bulls to work with, and they, of course, need more depth at the 4. Vanderbilt, I still think he has some upside and is on a team-friendly deal. He's just been hit with a lot of injuries, so 2 young rotational players that you can work with into your new direction or potentially flip in another deal, as well as 2 second-round picks to work with for the future. Now, how about a trade deal with the Miami Heat? The Heat know that this isn't a situation where they can just blow up their team with all the assets they've committed to their core, but they're also seeing they simply, right now for anyway, are not good enough to be true contenders and sitting in the middle of the pack of the Eastern Conference. And they've also got some very unfavorable contracts that are going to be hard to move in any deal, most notably to Terry Rozier and Duncan Robinson. Now, I don't want those contracts, and both of those players don't really make sense for the Bulls from a timeline and development perspective. The problem in trading for Zach Lavine, though, is making the money work. And so you have to bring in players that can fill up that salary. And so while in this trade, you're taking on some less than desirable contracts in Rozier and Robinson, who still have 2 years left on their deals, the Heat are going to have to give up more for the Bulls, and taking on those contracts and shipping us Jaime Jaquez Jr., who had a great rookie season last year, still with some upside and fits the youth movement, even though he was an older rookie. And then the Heat are also going to throw in a future first top 5 protected pick. This would free up money on the books for the Bulls sooner than they would if they had kept Lavine, and you also get a solid young player that fits the direction, and above all, a first-round pick. Now, this last one I'm pretty about, but honestly, if you go through the trade machine and try to find trades for Zach Lavine that make sense, it's actually quite hard given the amount of salary you have to find to make a deal, and one where it would actually make sense for the team that he's going to relative to what players they would be willing to give up. But this one with the Grizzlies, who I still believe will try and make a big splash now that they got their team back fully healthy, but thus far haven't looked like they're on contention level yet. So adding in Zach Lavine to give them more firepower for the season to go along with Ja makes sense. The reason I don't like this one that much for the Bulls is because basically having all these guys coming in as salary filler, Luke Kennard on expiring contracts, so that's nice, but Smart will give you defensive tenacity, which you need, but has kind of been a liability on offense, and he's still making a pretty penny with another year left on his deal. And then Brandon Clark is whatever, but the benefit here is getting that first-round pick for Zach Lavine, which again, I feel based on everything we know on Zach's limited market last season and over the offseason, walking away with a first-round pick in a Zach Lavine trade deal while also freeing up some space in your books is a huge win if you're the Bulls. Now, as the season goes on, of course, we're going to hear more and more rumors and possible teams interested in Zach, so I'll likely do a few more of these mock trade videos for Zach Lavine as we get closer to the deadline. Let me know what you guys think of some of these trades, and I would love to hear some of your trade proposals as well in the comments. As always, guys, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.